Greetings everyone, this is the Questing GM. So I'm back with another RPG study hour video. As always, continuing the trend of studying a rule set for future reference, as well as hopefully be helpful for anyone who is going through all these rule sets. So this is the third video for our Star Trek Adventures Quickstart guide. And in our previous video, we were studying about characters and the pre-gens that came with it. It was not a very fruitful session because there were a lot of mechanics being thrown around, terms at least, that were not explained as far as in terms of the character rules and what do they do exactly. But I think that's going to be most of it's going to be explained once we get into this today's session, because today's session we're going to be talking about task. We're going to talk about some of the core mechanics about task, improving the odds and threats. So I have a feeling that all those terms that we saw in the last video would all probably be explained in this video. And so this is actually one of the more important sections of the quick start rules, followed by probably the combat section that we will get into maybe in the next one. So because of the importance and because I'm trying to cover multiple sections across within one video, this might be a longer video. So I'm more than willing to dedicate a bit more time to make a longer video and maybe go beyond an hour. So let's not waste too much time. Let's just get into our topic for this session. So we will be starting off with task. Whenever a character attempts to complete an activity where the outcome is in doubt or failure is interesting, the character attempts a task. Now this is probably one of the easily oversight rules that we don't really think about, and actually you can find this is actually a very common phrase or paragraph to describe about the necessity of dice rolls and the necessity of what is considered a task. So a task is, in the definition of Star Trek Adventures Quick Start, is completing an adventure where the outcome is in doubt or failure is interesting. So that should be your key guiding principle into what constitutes a task and when should you call for something to be rolled, which is the outcome is in doubt and the failure is interesting. So you are trying to get two outcomes out of the completion of a task. When you feel that it's doubtful, the characters are trying to do something that you are not sure if they are capable of doing, or the idea of getting an interesting failure, which I think is a mechanic they sort of they have mechanics for making things interesting in some sense. But let's just move on to that. All right, so attempting a task involves a character's attributes, disciplines and focuses, and requires rolling 2 or more d20s. So we've learned about attributes and disciplines and focuses in the previous section. So attributes and disciplines are two separate sets of stats, you could call them, or scores. Attributes being the one that ranges between 7 to 12, and discipline, it was not explained in the rule section of the characters, but when we were looking through the pre-gens in the last session, it seems to range between a number of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. And then we have focuses, which are like one-liner areas of interest or subject matters that the players can decide, or maybe decide with GM that they are specialized in. There is a non-comprehensive list of example focuses, but I think the idea here is that GM and players are supposed to agree on what the character should have as focuses. And in the pre-gen that we saw, each character gets about six focuses. And now we come to the first mention of dice rolling, which is the base of 2 or more d20s. So it seems to me like this being the 2 d20 system, every attempt of a task always starts off with 2 d20s, and I think that's further explained in the later part of these rules. So they are generally I think they are like steps involving the attempting of a task and how do we determine a success and failure. So there's step 1, step 2, and I believe step 3 is here. up to step 6. So there is about 6 steps when it comes to completing of a task. Now, this may sound counterintuitive in some way because we may be used to the idea that, all right, it's just a matter of just rolling the dice and determining the results. But I think it's kind of important to have these steps list out, because there may be a certain order to things. There may be a certain order of when certain modifiers or abilities can be applied, and it also gives a good framework for the GM to really work out what is supposed to be happening upon a dice roll, and not just winging things out, and maybe forgetting a bit of the nuances or some of the intricacies of the rule set. So I'm actually kind of glad that they actually state things out in in number form, so it doesn't get too difficult to find within the wall of text, and it also gives a very good set layout to understanding what's actually happening upon a dice roll. So we'll start with step 1. The game master chooses which attribute and which discipline are appropriate for the task being attempted. Now, this is also another rather rule that is easily overlooked at, which is the game master decides which attribute and discipline are appropriate for the task being attempted. And I'm kind of glad that they kind of bold the thing. So when there is a task that needs to be when the characters want to perform a task, it is actually the GM who actually makes a decision on which is appropriate attribute and discipline. This may cause some backlash, because some especially if you're used to playing D&D in a certain way, it's something that players tend to call out what they want to do using which attribute and discipline. But by the rules, this is actually especially in a Star Trek Adventures game, this authority is not on the player's side. It's actually on the game master's side. So it's actually a very important thing to note. But how do you react to that? And, that's when your mileage will vary. All right. So they also consider whether any of the characters' focus is applicable. Add together the attribute and discipline chosen. This is the target number of the task. So the game master is the one who is in authority of deciding the discipline, the attribute, and if focuses are applicable or not. Obviously because since the authority is there, and if you don't want to be a GM who's too arbitrary, this can be a negotiation process, especially when it comes to focuses. So bear that in mind, that even if there is a negotiation process, the final say based on the rules as written is still vested on the GM. Now, the idea here is that you add the attribute and discipline chosen, and this is the target number for the task. So this is actually a concept that I think I've been seeing quite a lot lately, and I'm actually kind of liking it in some sense, that the so-called DC, or difficulty class, or the target number to beat, is self-deterministic. It is not decided. It is not arbitrarily decided by the GM, and that sort of removes some of the abuses or some of the powers that the GMs can tend to make. Is that if they are not intending for the players to succeed on something, they will intentionally just rack up the DC to do so, which may be a bit impossible for players to beat, and then it becomes this weird meta game where players decide the things that the GM is actually intentionally not allowing them to perform something. So using a self-deterministic DC method reduces, takes away that sort of dangerous abuse, and the good side is it actually gives the players an idea of what they're good at and what they're not so good at, because they can calculate their own target number based on the stats they are available with. So the only real difficulty here is the GM who decides which attribute and discipline is appropriate. Maybe on a more friendlier scale, you could say, the GM could actually list out several attributes and disciplines that are applicable, and it's a matter of which characters are the ones who has the highest of those combinations. So it doesn't have to be only a specific attribute and discipline. It can be several, and then it's just throwing out to the players and saying which one of you have these, and those are the ones that will be applicable for the task. So I think it's these are rules that has to be very clear, and it's actually from there where, you know, some sort of variations that can happen is that is entirely up to the GM and to the group. All right, so going on to step 2, the GM then sets the difficulty of the task. This is normally between 0 and 5, but can go higher. The difficulty is the number of successes the players must roll on their d20s to successfully complete the task. So rather than the GM deciding the target number, that is actually on the prerogative of the GM to decide the difficulty of the task. Now, given how this rules is written, that the GM decides the number between 0 to 5, and if you know if it's like, for example, 2, then that means the players have to have 2 successes. Which is, I guess, possible on a 2d20 system scale, but naturally that actually means things are harder, and also that puts the arbitrary power that I was just talking about earlier, that you know, the GMs may abuse the idea that if I want to make this task intentionally impossible to do, then it will just rank up the difficulty without, you know, just cause. But I think that's something they will address at a later point in this section of the rules. All right, so just going to step 3, the players roll their dice. The players roll their dice pool. The players take 2 d20s and may choose to purchase up to 3 additional d20s by spending momentum, adding to threat, or using determination. See improving odds, page 10. Once additional dice, if any, have been purchased, the player rolls their dice pool. So every player starts off with a base of 2 d20, and then they can purchase up to 3 more d20s using the, you know, whatever resources that they have, which is momentum, threat, and determination, which I think will definitely be explained later on, especially in, you know, they've given the section on page 10. So after naming the attribute and discipline, determining the difficulty, now we roll the dice. Then we purchase the dice and then we roll the dice. All right, step 4, each die that rolls equal to or less than the target number scores a single success. So that's pretty much straightforward. This is a roll under system, so which is, you know, quite natural given the fact that, you know, because attributes and disciplines are added. So if you have a higher attribute, if you have a higher sum of attribute and disciplines, then naturally the number will be higher, and it wouldn't make any sense for you to roll higher than that, because that will actually means that a higher sum is actually bad for you. So I think there are also 3 nuances that comes with rolling success. If there's an applicable focus, then each die that rolls equal to or less than the discipline being used scores 2 successes. Now, note here it only says discipline and not attribute discipline. So let's just say that you have a attribute of, say, 10. All right, 10, and you have a discipline of 5, which is 15, and you roll a 4. And also, yeah, take note that you need to have an applicable focus. So let's say you have 10, and you have an attribute of 10, you have a discipline of 5, and you're applying focus, and you roll a 4. So that 4 counts as 2 successes rather than 1 success. And also take note that you have to roll under the discipline number, not the combination of 14 and 15, not the combination of 10 and 5. And so that means that even if you have focus, your chances of actually rolling under is actually quite slim, because, you know, as I said, the discipline range seems to be ranging between 1 to 5. So rolling under that is actually quite a difficult task in terms of probability. All right, each die roll that rolls a natural 1 scores 2 successes. So being a roll under system, 1 is naturally the critical success, and in this case it's actually interpreted as 2 successes. And each die roll that rolls a 20 causes a complication. So 20 being the natural fail, and therefore that is interpreted as a complication. So we need to see what exactly is a complication later on. All right. Step 5, if the number of successes scored equals or exceeds the difficulty of the task, then the task is completed successfully. All right. So again, this is one of those things that we usually tend to forget, is equals or exceeds. So if it's a difficulty 2, you need to get 2 successes minimum, and anything beyond that is I think it's translated into something else. Okay, is there any nuances? If the number of successes is less than the difficulty of the task, then the task fails. Any successes in excess of the difficulty of the task becomes momentum. So Now you're seeing how the pieces are starting to connect. uh, if you have a natural fail, you get a complication. If you have additional successes, for example, for you got two successes out of a difficulty one task, then you have one momentum. So what does a momentum do? We need to check out later on in page 11, it says. All right, and the final step is the game master describes the outcome of the task. If the task was successful, the player may spend momentum to improve the result further. After this, the effects of any complication are applied. So again, another matter of ordering. So after rolling the dice pool, and if there are any if there are any excess successes, they can be immediately spent as momentum to improve the result, or and then only then if then only any complications or natural ones or natural 20s would then be applied after the momentum. So the players don't really have the foresight of knowing what the complication will be. It might be interesting for the momentum to be able to cancel out any potential complications, but we'll need to see the rules later on for complications and momentum and see if that is possible. I don't think I have really much comment to really say about this order of things, that momentum comes before complications. But I think I'm kind of interested in, like, in the case that momentums are not able to cancel out any complications. I'm kind of interested in seeing how players take this and decide for themselves, like, should they spend their momentum just in case of the complications that they're getting off. And I'm also curious right now. For example, let's say I'm rolling 2d20s. Maybe I'm rolling 2d20s. I'm using my resources such as momentum, threats, and determination to maybe buy additional dice. Let's say I get 5d20s, and then I'm trying to roll for a difficulty task of 1. And for example, when I roll my dice of 5d20s, I got a total result of, let's say, 3 successes and 2 natural 20s. So that means that increasing the number of dice doesn't necessarily just increase your chances of successing, but it actually also increases the chances of you getting complications, because there's a chances of you rolling there's more chances of you rolling natural 20s as much as there is chances of you for rolling natural ones. So that's actually an interesting thought, and I'm actually will be interested in seeing how all this seeing all these rules in action, and see how it actually sort of influences player decision into what is it exactly they want to do, because it looks more like a high risk high reward kind of play, rather than just giving yourself better chances. All right, so we have an example scenario here, which is something I definitely will appreciate in something, even something as small as a quick start, but it definitely helps to learn rules a bit a bit more cohesively, I feel. All right, so Scotty is attempting to squeeze additional power out of the enterprise engines. His target number is his control attribute and engineering discipline for a target of 15, control attribute being 11 and engineering discipline being 4. 11 plus 4, 15, and he has a focus in starship propulsion, and the task has a difficulty of 2. So based on what we understood, so the target number that he has to beat is a 15, and he has a difficulty. He needs to get 2 successes out of under 2 successes, because the task difficulty is 2. So he has to roll 2 d20s to get 2 numbers under 15. He rolls 2 d20s, rolling a 4 and a 19. So 4 and a 19, 4 is a pass, 19 is a fail. And remember that 4 is equal to or less. So you see 4 is equal to the discipline of 4. So this 4 is counted as 2 successes rather than 1 success. The 4 scores 2 successes thanks to his focus in starship propulsion, while the 19 scores no success. With a total of 2 successes, Scotty succeeds at his task. So yeah, so that's actually a very good example, and especially this actually helps to clarify that this is not a typo, that it's roll under that when you apply focus, you have to roll under discipline, not under discipline and attributes. All right, moving on into further explanation of task. We have location, we have traits. So locations, characters, and situations all come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and these differences are handled in-game as traits. Each trait is a single word or a short phrase which describes a single significant fact about whatever it is the trait belongs to and remains in place so long as true about the scene, character, or place to which it is attached. So this is actually a very difficult concept to grasp, especially considering that in our previous video when we were going through the pre-gens, we did see each character having a single trait, and I attributed it to race. But it seems like this concept of trait actually goes beyond just race. There may be different scenarios that is called a trait. So I'm gonna need a more concrete example, more concrete connection to how this idea of trait that is a single significant fact, and that is tied to scenes, character, or place. So I'm not sure. I'm hoping to give a good example of this, but we have to see what exactly this trait mechanic is. Traits, advantages, and complications will do one of the following things. So traits, we've already been explaining what traits are. We have never heard of this word advantages, and complications is what happens when you roll a natural 20. All right. The trait would not impact the task and does not have any effect. The trait is beneficial and allows the task to be attempted when it might normally be impossible. The trait is beneficial and reduces the difficulty of the task by 1. Is there any more after that? Yes, the trait is detrimental, increases the difficulty task by 1, increases the difficulty of the task by 1. The trait is detrimental, it either prevents the task from being attempted when it normally be possible, or missed situation now requires a task when one would not normally be required. So traits, it seems like traits can swing both ways. Yeah. The more noteworthy one is obviously increasing or reducing difficulties, or making what would have been a normal, what would have been a routine or non-task related task become a task. And there's also the possibility of making tasks that were either non-impossible to become impossible, and vice versa. So again, I'm still needing a good example of what constitutes as a trait, because it seems to have some really significant impact, and I'm not sure if this something what complications can do. Like, can a complication turn what is a task that can be performed normally become impossible? We'll have to see about that. All right, so I think there's some subsection under traits. An advantage is a trait which is inherently positive or beneficial and which will never have a detrimental effect to its owners. So is it a right way to say that advantages are basically the beneficial traits and complications are the negative traits? All right, we have to see what complications say. A complication is a trait which is inherently negative or problematic and which will never have a beneficial effect upon its owners. I have a feeling that never having a detrimental or beneficial effect upon its owners is supposed to be a very clarifying disclaimer, but I've not seen it in action yet, so I'm not exactly sure when does this come into play. But like I said, my question is, are beneficial traits automatically advantages, and are detrimental traits automatically complications? We'll have to see when things are explained more clearly. All right, task difficulty. Unless otherwise noted, most tasks have a basic difficulty of 1, though more routine or straightforward tasks may have a difficulty of 0, and more complex or problematic tasks will have higher difficulties. After this, the Game Master then considers if there are any other factors in the current scene or environment or affecting the characters involved that would alter the basic difficulty. Okay, that's actually quite a lot to break down actually. Let's try to go through this once again slowly. Alright, so unless otherwise noted, most tasks have a basic difficulty of 1, though most routine or straightforward tasks have a difficulty of 0, and more complex tasks have much higher difficulties. So our base, so like I said, there's this in the task section, I was talking about GMs could possibly arbitrarily decide tasks that are too high for players to achieve. But I'm pretty glad that they have this section here, because it sort of clarifies a bit on what is considered best practices or good practices for a GM to decide on difficulty, which is it starts with 1, and only then, and if there's the possibility of a task with a difficulty of 0, which means there's no successes required, and there may and more complex tasks should then be given higher difficulties. So we have some basic guideline. We have some guiding guidelines here to know how to determine difficulty, which is as per design by the book. But whether that's followed or not, that's a different matter. All right. After this, the GM then considers if there are any factors in the current scene or environment affecting the characters involved that will alter the basic difficulty. So the basic difficulty here being 1, and then on the step when the GM decides on difficulty, they will have to look at several factors. So factors in the current scene or environment. There are factors in the current scene or environment or affecting the character involved. So that's 3 things that basically you have to look into. What are the things that are affecting the scene, the environment, and the characters. Yeah, so that's actually pretty helpful guideline, I would say, in studying and understanding how to decide how can we determine difficulties relatively fairly. All right, so we have an example here. Dr. McCoy is attempting to perform complex heart surgery on Ambassador Sarek. This has a basic difficulty of 2, but there are other factors. So the reason why we didn't go with a basic difficulty of 1, which is supposed to be the basic difficulty, is because we're performing complex heart surgery. So I guess the key word here is complex, but heart surgery in itself actually sounds pretty complex. So I wouldn't expect it to be something that's of difficulty 1. But there are other factors. Firstly, Sarek is a Vulcan, and McCoy's knowledge of Vulcan's physiology is limited, which increases difficulty by 1. Okay, so we have one factor here. This is affecting, I believe this will be affecting character. So because of his character's lack of knowledge, the difficulty go up by 1. Secondly, without a Vulcan blood donor, the operation can't be performed at all. This complication is overcome by having Spock donate blood to the procedure, however. So it will have normally been another difficulty. Maybe this is affecting, say, the current environment, the environment where they do not have a Vulcan blood donor, if they did not have a Vulcan blood donor, but this is already been overcome. All right, and then thirdly, the Enterprise is under attack, which is obviously disruptive, increasing the difficulty by 1. All right, so together these increase the difficulty to 4. Fortunately, McCoy has the Enterprise sickbay and Nurse Chapel to assist him. All right, so the reason how we get 4 is because it's 2 plus 1 plus 1, that's 4. Although I'm not sure exactly why is the difficulty still 4, because the second difficulty is already been overcome by Spock, so actually should be considered a difficulty 3 because of 2 plus 1. But maybe because there is no, maybe if Spock was not in the scene, then difficulty still remains as +1. And also the fact that the reason that we got into the +1 difficulty is because the Enterprise is under attack. So that's probably something that's affecting the environment. But now he's talking about there is some remedies to the difficulties because he has the Enterprise sickbay and Nurse Chapel to assist him. So that's on determining task difficulty. So let's see what else is there to learn about. Okay, about task. So we are pretty much done with the task section of the rules, about attempting tasks, about traits, how we and the steps of attempting tasks, the traits that are affecting complications and difficulty, and then the difficulty, task difficulty. So we're moving on to the next major section of the rules, which is improving the odds. So Star Trek Avengers provides several ways for characters to improve their chances of success by buying additional D20s to roll on a task. Alright, so it looks to me there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways that that we can improve our odds. So the first one is one or more characters may assist the task. Each character attempting to assist rolls 1 d20 using a target number of their own attribute plus discipline combination. Any success they score are added to the task success, providing the main character attempting the task scores 1 success. Alright, so this is actually pretty straightforward and simple. So, but instead of rolling 2 d20s, they roll 1 d20, and if that succeeds, that gets added to the success pool, so to speak. Alright, and then next one we have the momentum. The spend create opportunity allows characters to buy additional dice, representing coordination, teamwork, and building upon prize success. Uh, Now, do bear in mind that this is actually a bit uh, unclear, because generally, if you do not have any momentum prior to attempting the task, then it's quite impossible for you to spend momentum uh, upon making your first task check. Because as you remember in the if you remember in the earlier section, momentum is decided and spent after the determination of success is after any determination of success. So you are supposed to buy the additional d20s and step 3, but you only gain momentum if there are any addition any excess success at step 5. Yeah. So if you do not have any prior momentum, you will not have any momentum to spend in step 3. But any momentum that you gain in step 5 will be useful for future task checks when they can be spent in step 3. So yeah, so that's probably something to note. That's probably my interpretation of it. I probably need someone to clarify that, but we'll see. Let's just move on and see what else is there. All right, threat. The create opportunity spend can be paid for by adding threat instead of spending momentum. This represents taking risks or acting recklessly. So in this one this is a bit of a slight reverse, I believe, because if you do not have any momentum to spend at first, then you can actually decide to pay it forward pay with threats instead. So in step 2 you can decide to say step 3 you could decide to say I would like to add to threats and therefore gain more dice as a result of that. And threats, we'll definitely be covering that in this video, because we'll be talking about that is the last section of the rules. Alright, and then we have determination. A character may spend determination to buy a single bonus d20 for the task. This die is considered to have already rolled a 1 and therefore scores 2 automatic successes. Determination may only be spent in certain circumstances as described on page 12 and 13. I believe page 12 and 13 is a typo here, because if you look down on page 12 and 13, this is being 10 and this is being 11. 12 is here, which I believe doesn't have any sort of explanation of what determination is, and then 13 is actually going into the conflict rules. So I believe what they're trying to say was determination would be explained in page 11 and 12, which is here and here. So yeah, that's something that you might want to take note of, and definitely something the designer should take note of if they're trying to if they will correct this quick start at any point in time. Yeah, just minor typo error, nothing major. All right, talents. A few talents that character may have grant them bonus d20s in specific circumstances. This costs nothing, but it must be the correct situation for use, and they still count towards the number of bonus d20s that can be purchased. So this is something I think that I haven't encountered that the rule has clearly specified that the maximum number that you can buy is up to 5. I think it's been hinted at, it's implied, but I would have appreciated if there was something more concrete in saying that you can only buy up to 5. Yeah, let's see if they cover that. Can buy into 3 additional spot. I guess you could say, yeah, purchase up to 3 additional d20s by spending momentum or using determination. And they didn't cover that they didn't say talents. So talents is just giving you free dice that you can only gain from certain correct situations, but you can never have more than 5 d20s as a result. And determination being the determination is actually pretty interesting, because it's actually I think better than momentum, in the sense that momentum gives you free additional dice, but determination gives you basically 3 successes, and not just 1 success. Actually, it's actually 2 success. But it can only be spent in certain circumstances. Is the drawback, is the limitations put onto it. So in a way, I guess if you're a GM, you probably would want to have 1 or 2 scenarios or scenes where players can spend their determination, because otherwise why have determination at all. But yeah, but bear in mind that allowing your players to use their determination is actually a pretty big deal, and it might even result in something that gets a scene that is easily easily dealt with, because the players they didn't have to roll any dice because they can just spend determination to succeed. All right. For the Game Master buying bonus d20s for non-player characters, there are fewer options. The Game Master may spend points of threat to add dice to a non-player character's task roll. Typically, player characters do not have determination. All right, so players, so the opposite, or you could say the opposite of PCs and momentum is actually threats. So if NPCs wanted to spend their momentum, they will have to spend threats instead. So I think all this will be much clearer once we get into the threat section. But it's kind of interesting that they point this out right now, and also the fact that NPCs are incapable of getting free successes from determination. All right. So we are going to a sidebar for a moment before we get into the next page and the next section. So difficulty 0 task. So this is actually being talked about, alluded to in the task difficulty area. When do you actually use a difficulty 0 task? The circumstances can reduce the difficulty of a task even down to 0. At other times, a task may be so simple that it does not require dice to be rolled at all. These are simple tasks, and bear in mind the capitals. So it's something that you have to sort of take note of and try to determine what is there a definition of a simple task. If a task is difficulty 0, it does not require dice to be rolled. It is automatically successful with 0 successes and no risk of complications. So that's actually a pretty important thing. There is no risk of complications, and the result that you roll is actually 0 success. However, because no roll is made, it does not generate momentum of any kind. That being the important point here. Even bonus momentum from talents, particularly advantageous situations and the like. A character also cannot spend momentum on the result. Yeah, so they cannot, you cannot improve any results of a zero difficulty task. Neither can you face additional problems from a 0 difficulty task. At the Game Master's discretion, a character can roll the dice against a difficulty of 0 and generate momentum as normal. 0 successes are required in this case, so every success generates momentum, but this comes with a novel risk of complications as well. This sort of difficulty 0 task is useful if it's important to see how well a character does something, but there's no real chance of failure. So I think this is the most important line in the entire idea of difficulty 0 task, because if you allow players to roll, then there is potential momentum as well as potential complications. But the idea of using them is because you want to determine how well a character does. So there's a matter of degree of success. So I guess this is your typical what you will call a taking 20 on a taking 10 on a lock, or on a lock pick of a door that has no potential chance of failure or interesting failure in that sense. So this is a very handy tool, I would say, to consider. So you have the basic rules of what happens when you're rolling a difficulty 0 task, and you have the variant of what you can do with a 0 task if you want to make things a bit more interesting. All right, so moving on. So we are still on improving the odds, and now we're getting into momentum. Alright, whenever a character attempts a task and scores a greater number of successes than the difficulty, these extra successes become momentum, a valuable resource that allows characters to complete tasks more quickly or more thoroughly than normal, or otherwise gain additional benefits. Each success above and beyond the difficulty of a task becomes 1 point of momentum, which the character may immediately use or save for later. Each point of momentum can be used or saved separately. Alright, the player group may only ever have a pool of 6 momentum at any one time. So you generate momentum by having additional successes than the difficulty, and as we recall in the steps of resolving a task, you can decide to spend the momentums immediately, or you can actually save it. And I'm assuming it sounds like there's a party pool thing. So you can actually save it, put into a pool, but you can only have up to 6 momentum in that case. So it really there is some minor decision in terms of deciding how much momentum to spend now and how much momentum to save up for later. So this is when do you uh, decide uh, how much momentum you want to do is actually after calculating how many momentums that you have, and then uh, after the outcome of the task is described as successful. But again, as always, is you have to spend momentum before complications are set comes in. So okay, that's a general idea, but then again, I'm not seeing any potential pitfalls or loopholes within momentum. It's just a concept to understand. And before I think we talk about threats and determination, let's look at this sidebar here on example use for momentum. So they might expand a bit more on the concept of momentum. The most common ways to spend momentum are listed below. Immediate momentum spends can happen at any time. Repeatable momentum spends can be done more than once in succession. Okay, so create advantage. Spending 2 momentum establishes some new advantage in addition to whatever effect the successful task had, or removes a complication from the scene. So like I said earlier, is there a chance for you to use momentum to get rid of complications? And the answer is yes. You can actually spend 2 momentum to remove a complication from the scene. Conversely, you can actually spend 2 momentum to get an advantage. You're adding a trait to the particular scene. So the interesting thing here is because the point of complications and advantages is because they're either beneficial or detrimental to the task. And in some cases, it's actually making tasks either increasing or reducing the difficulty of a task, or making tasks impossible or normal when it was previously impossible. So I'm not sure exactly how that works, because as I said, you spend momentum after determination of success, which means the task, if it was previously impossible, you wouldn't be able to perform. And if the task was normal and becomes impossible, that actually happens at the end of the resolution of the task. So it doesn't make sense that you have to make a task and then some complication makes it impossible, and then you have to spend momentum to overcome that. I'm guessing that's probably how it sounds like it works, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So I'm like again like I said, I think there has to be some sort of a much larger example of when all of these things come together, and then you can sort of see how the picture really works out. But then again, this could be a quick start thing, so there may be some limitations to how it's being explained. And if any of you are watching this have a better idea of what's going on, then drop down in the comments and let me know. All right, create opportunity, immediate and repeatable. Add additional d20s to a task. These dice must be purchased before any dice are rolled for the task. The first die purchase costs 1 momentum, the second one costs 2, and the third one costs 5, for a total of 6. So just a quick note before I get into the heart of the discussion. Do note that the first die costs 1, second dice costs 2, which becomes 3, and then the third dice costs 3. So for a total of 6. And remember that 6 momentum is actually the maximum size of the momentum pool. So basically, if you want to use create opportunity, you are potentially going to be spending all the momentum that's been kept up throughout the session. But that's something to consider as your limitations. Now, create opportunity here, it says that these you get additional d20 for a task, and it already explains that these dice must be purchased before any dice are rolled for the task. So remember, if you remember going back to the steps of rolling dice, momentum is gained at step 5, but if you have momentum from the previous task, then you can actually spend it in step 3. So you actually must spend momentum at step 3 and before you roll in step 4. And any momentum that you gain in step 5 cannot be used to retcon any d20s that were rolled before that. So that's actually a interesting, it's actually important. It's actually kind of good to actually note this down and make things a little sound a bit clearer. So that's create opportunity. And now we have create problem. A character can choose to make things more difficult for an opponent, increasing the difficulty of a single task by 1 for every 2 momentum spent. Create problem must be done before any dice are rolled for the task. So this is sort of using momentums more offensively. You spending 2 momentum points to increase the difficulty of a task, and but the price being quite expensive here at 2 momentums for each. In a way, this is kind of like the create advantage, but rather than rather than giving complications, you're actually just increasing difficulty. So there's a difference between complications and difficulty, in some sense, I guess, because part of the detrimental effects of a trait is actually increasing difficulty by 1, which is what create problem actually effectively does. So but I do like this idea of create opportunity and create problem, because you can use momentums in different ways, and bear in mind that you're increasing the difficulty. It only costs a consistent the same amount to increase difficulty by 1, which is 2 for everyone, rather than opportunity, which is a tiered spending. So theoretically, you can actually increase difficulty by 3 if you spend all your momentum in the pool, and because it's a repeatable thing, so it is possible for you to increase the difficulty of a task by 3. All right, and then we have obtain information, which is repeatable. Each point of momentum can be spent to ask the game master a single question answered truthfully about the current situation. So again, this is a repeatable thing, so you can actually ask up to 6 questions, answer truthfully about the current situation. Again, this is something, this is one of those subjective sort of application of rules that there has to be a certain situation that demonstrates this a bit better. So this is something to bear in mind, especially being one of the cheapest ways to spend momentum, even though it may not be the most effective. And also because the fact that you can actually spend, it doesn't say when you have to spend this, so you can actually spend this you can't spend this immediately. So you can't this cannot be used during the same after making a dice check. So I'm guessing this is supposed to be actually spent sort of like outside of a task. You can, at any point when the characters find themselves in any kind of situation that they want to know something about something, rather than asking the GM for a clearer description of something like that, they can just spend a momentum and say, I want to know this answer. Interesting. I've never seen a rule like this before. Getting a truthful answer out of a GM by mechanics, but I think there is some interesting applications that can be used. The GM could sort of have a list of information that they have hidden away from the players in every scene, and that becomes the drawing point for players to spend a momentum on it. This, like I said, this could be very useful maybe in scenes where there's like about information, or someone's lying, or someone is lying, and rather than making a very back and forth sort of encounter, especially a social encounter, you can just spend momentum, like, is this person lying, rather than performing a task to determine if that person is lying. That's one way I can see how this application can work. But I would definitely like to see how players tend to use this in any kind of given situation. But like I said, because this being one of those subjective application of mechanics, it means that the GM has to sort of prepare for it in some ways, and I'm not exactly sure how exactly is a GM supposed to prepare for players who want to use obtain information, because it would really suck if the players spend a momentum to obtain information and there's nothing valuable that the GM can give. So yeah, like I said, this is just one of those really dangerous gray areas that when design doesn't meet with expectation or doesn't meet with application. All right, so that's momentum. Some interesting ideas going on around here. And yeah, and as the sidebar mentioned, this is the most common ways. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be the comprehensive list. Maybe on a quick start level, maybe there are more ways to spend momentum in the core rules. That would be something I would like to see. But I much prefer momentum having a more fixed usage rather than one of those negotiation type of usage, because that actually devalues momentum quite a bit if everything has to be on a negotiation process. uh, I much rather this being something that empowers characters and players rather than being this weird gray area between player and GM. All right, so that's momentum. Let's go back into other ways of improving odds. We are talking about threats. All right. While not something the player interact with directly, threat is an integral part of Star Trek Adventures. The Game Master make use of threats to alter scenes, empower non-player characters, and generally make things increasingly perilous and exciting. Players can add points of threat to the Game Master's pool instead of spending momentum. Okay, so threat, if you are familiar with Numenera, that actually is pretty much GM interruption in a way. Similar in concept, but maybe a bit more refined in terms of mechanics and having an actual name called threats. So when is it a good time for a GM to use threats to alter scenes, to empower non-player characters, and generally make things increasingly perilous and exciting? And this is something I probably didn't notice, that players can add points to threat to the Game Master's pool instead of spending momentum. So it becomes a resource management in the sense that if players have a certain amount of momentum and they are not willing to spend it on to do some rather frivolous or trivial things in their mind, then they can say let's just risk it and give threats to the DM instead of using our more precious momentum to do it. So I'm guessing there's obviously probably a downside to give a GM a threat, and depending how the GM can use those threats, which I again comes back to what the threat section will say later on. But it's actually an interesting idea in the sense that the players also have to think about not just momentum that they have, but they can also think about a possible loan or giving credit to the GM instead as a price. All right, and now we have determination. Determination can be used by any player citing one of their values. So values, as you remember, is something that every pre-gen has a list of them. I believe they have about 4, if I'm not mistaken. Let's just take a quick glance. They have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, they have 4 values per character. So yeah, that's actually quite a large, quite a big number, and that means that the number of situations they can actually use their values actually quite a lot. The players must justify how the value applies to the current situation. A point of determination spent provides one of the following benefits. So this is a player justification thing. Player justifying to the GM, right? Okay, I have this value and does it apply in this situation, and therefore it's allowed. So what are the benefits of using determination? All right, so we have 4. Perfect opportunity. A point of determination may be spent to grant the character a single bonus d20. This bonus d20 is different because it's considered to have resulted in a 1, giving 2 successes. The limit for additional 2 d20s bought for a task still applies. So this is what we learned earlier. That if you spend determination, you get an automatic 2 success. Although this line is new, which is the limit for additional d20s bought for a task still applies. So that means that you can even in a situation where you can spend more than 1 determination, but if you already bought more than say 4 dices or 5 d20s, then you cannot spend any additional determination for that. So bear in mind that there was something that we talked about earlier. There was something that you couldn't buy. Talents, yes, talents. Oh, you cannot buy more than 5 d20s from talents, and you cannot buy that same amount from determination. All right, so moment of inspiration. A point of determination may be spent to re-roll all the characters' dice in the dice pool. So this is actually an interesting trade between getting 2 success automatically or re-rolling all your dice. Naturally, this would probably mean that if you have a task of difficulty 2 or of more than 2, for example 3, 4, and 5, and if you roll less than that amount of successes, then you probably want to go with re-rolling all the dice, re-rolling all the dice rather than spending determination only get 2, which is less than you needed. Then again, this can also be applied, for example, like if you're trying to score for momentum, and you didn't get any, but you have enough successes, then you could spend a determination to re-roll all that dice just to be a bit more greedy in getting momentum out of it. I like this different applications of determination for doing pretty much the same thing but in different with different results. All right, surge of activity. The character may immediately perform another task as soon as the current one has been resolved. It sounds like doesn't really make much sense unless there is some mechanics of having more than one task being a same task or something like that. I can probably see this is something like in combat where you can actually make a second attack with a determination, maybe something along those lines. Is what if an attack constitutes as a task, that's possible. But I think there may be a different mechanic at work here that makes this an advantageous thing to do to be able to do a second task right after the first one. All right, make it so the character immediately creates an advantage that applies to the current scene. So advantage here being a trait, and in some sense an advantage may be more beneficial than gaining 2 successes in the case of determination or re-rolling all your dice, because an advantage may actually reduce the difficulty. So it actually means that the task difficulty is actually less than that. But again, there is this dangerous caveat in the sense that you can only spend determination. When do you spend it? You can spend determination before you roll the dice, I believe. Let me just have a quick check. Yeah, you spend determination when you're designing the dice pool, and that's actually after difficulty has been set. So you could potentially reduce the difficulty. For example, the GM decides the difficulty is 4, and when you move into the dice pool stage, you could say I'm reducing difficulty by 1 to 3 using my determination. Okay, that's an interesting mechanic. That's an interesting idea of determination. Whether there is there's a better reason to reduce difficulty rather than gaining 2 successes, there may be a very unique situation when that applies. Hope you have to see for that. Okay, so that's basically the 4 usage of determination. I believe it's 4. Yep. So let's. Oh, okay, so we have an example here. So hopefully that will clear up a lot of things. Spock is attempting to uncover the truth behind a conspiracy. Suspecting that the Enterprise computers have been tampered with, he sets about testing his hypothesis. This is a reasons-plus engineering task, using his computer's focus with a difficulty of 3. Given the difficulty and the urgency, Spock buys an additional D20 for the task, as Spock is motivated by his value. Logic is the beginning, not the end of wisdom. Logic, that's okay. So he buys an additional D20, which gives him 2 successes because of his value. Spock may spend 1 determination to aid in his task, which he does not buy to buy an extra D20. This die is considered, which he does to buy an extra D20. This die is considered to be a roll of 1, giving 2 successes. Yeah, like I said, because he's using his value, that gives him 1 determination, and that determination is translated into a 1, which gives him 2 successes. So that's 2 successes on a difficulty of 3, and he only bought 1 D20, so he still has 2 D20 to roll one success out of it for it to be a successful task. So that's interesting. Although I would have probably liked it if they used the determination to do something else, for example applying application, or maybe re-rolling the dice after rolling 2 D20s and only getting a 3. And that's also something to think about, because if it's a difficulty of 3 and you only have 2 D20 to roll, then you are actually kind of forced into a situation where you actually have to spend either momentum or determination, or maybe even give threats to get an additional D20 just to meet the minimum of the difficulty. So that's actually interesting. In this case, maybe it's possible since it's a difficulty 3 task, he could have spent the determination to get an advantage to reduce the difficulty by 1, which makes it a difficulty of 2. But then he won't have 2 D20s to roll to get 2 successes. So it is logically logically the better call to spend determination to get 2 successes out of 3 rather than reducing the difficulty to 2 and then still having to roll 2d20s for it. Alright, so it's already 1 hour. I think we have actually entered into we only just finished all the sections on tasks and the factors that can influence them. So we were spending the last bit talking about threats, and I'm not sure, I might want to extend this a little bit further to go back onto the pre-gens and read some of the talents, because talents is one of the factors that can be used to improve your task. And hopefully by the second time around reading through the talents, a lot more things will make sense into what they actually do. But we'll get to that when we cross the bridge, when we get there. Alright, threats. Throughout a game session, the game master will collect threat and spend it to create problems for the player characters. In this way, threat creates tension that builds throughout the story, eventually culminating in an exciting finale that exhausts the threat pool. Alright. The game master begins each session with 2 points of threat for every player in the group. So that's actually quite a lot, because that it gets bigger when when there's more players. So theoretically, it sounds like you're actually supposed to only spend 2 threats on a player, but that's also on an initial run. But that number obviously will vary as if there is more threats being collected. But I think it's an interesting guideline to say that you should only spend 2 threats on a player to be fair. Whether that's the intent or not it's maybe something to be discussed. All right. They gain threat in the following circumstances. Alright, so you gain threat, immediate momentum. Whenever a character uses an immediate momentum spend, such as buying bonus d20s, they can do this by adding to the game master's threat pool point for point. So let's see if we can make sense out of this. If they buy, they can do this by adding to the game master's threat point for point. And this only applies to immediate momentum. So if we go back into the examples of momentum, the only immediate momentums that can be used is create opportunity and create problem. So is this saying that you can, instead of spending momentum, you can actually pay threats in exchange? Is this a alternative? Is this a substitute amount? That if, let's say, the players do not have any momentum, they would say that I will want to create opportunity to buy 1 additional dice that costs 1 momentum, but instead of spending 1 momentum, I'm giving you 1 threat in exchange. Is this the scenario that's supposed to happen? That if at the first task, the only option that's available for PCs who want to gain to use any of these immediate momentums is to give threats. And it would be crazy if it says that if he wants to get 6 dice, he gets three more dice to be 5d20s, and he will actually be giving the GM 6 threat points for it, making the initial pool of 2 times player plus 6 on the first try. That sounds a bit that might sound a bit outlandish, but that is the possible range that's being provided here. And conversely, I guess this is it's probably more interesting to create problem with threats, because when you create problems with threats, you're actually making things more difficult for the GM and the NPCs, and the GM can actually spend the threats that he's gained to actually cover those losses or cut down those difficulties. In this case, it being 2 for every momentum spent. That's actually a very interesting thought. Let's see if that's actually how it works. Although I'm not sure if they will provide an example of that, but that's actually something to keep in mind if you're reading threats and its potential application. I suspect this might be better explained in the core rules at some point. But if anyone has knowledge about this, let me know as well in the comments about. Yeah, that can you spend the threats immediately to cover up any problems created? Because if you're going back to the steps on how to resolve tasks, there is no step where the NPCs get to spend threats in the lineup, unless this same rule applies to NPCs. But there is still no point in time where NPCs can actually spend their threats, because it's never mentioned here. All right, so let's go back a little bit. All right. Complications. When a character suffers one or more complications on a task, they or the game master may choose not to have the complication take effect, but this in exchange for adding 2 points to the threat pool. So complication, as you remember, is found when you get an extra 20. So the game master may choose not to have the complication take effect, but gain 2 points of threat instead. So this is, in a way, this is like the reverse of a natural 1, in the sense that natural 1s translate to 2 successes, but natural 20 can translate into 2 threat points instead. This is interesting because that actually means that there's actually a lot more reading to the results in determining the threat, and there is, as I said, there's this potential because momentum can be spent to remove a complication, if I remember correctly. Yes, it can. Momentum can be spent to remove a complication, but at the same time, the GM can actually decide not to apply the complication now and apply it for later. And I suspect, that given that there is this ability to apply to take away complications for threat points, it probably costs the same amount to apply a complication, be probably the same amount of threat points. It would be a bit unfair if the cost of giving a complication was less than 2 threat points, but we'll see. Threatening circumstances. The environment or circumstances of a new scene may be threatening enough to warrant adding 1 or 2 points of threat to the pool. Now this sounds a bit arbitrary, because in the sense that what's stopping a GM from saying that every scene has a threatening circumstance, it gives a threat 2 points of threat to the pool. So this is something that GM probably has to be a bit fair about it, and they will probably have to explain to the PCs why it constitutes a threatening circumstance. I'm not sure if we encountered any situation where threatening circumstance is actually a applicable mechanic, that when are there situations that are considered threatening circumstances, or are there situations that causes threatening circumstances, and therefore that results in the GM gaining 2 threat points to the pool. Yeah, I probably need to reread some of the rules later on just to be sure, but at this point in time it feels like this is something that the GM can just add to their pool for really without really any check and balance by the player. Alright, and the fourth way is non-player characters with unspent momentum cannot save it like player characters because they do not have a good momentum pool. Instead, a non-player adds unspent momentum to the threat pool. So like I said, this is the reverse of momentum for NPCs, because NPCs every addition success is added to the threat pool, rather than every addition success is being able to spend immediately as momentum. In return, the GM Master can spend threat in a few ways. Examples of this can be found in the mission that accompanies these rules. So this is actually a pretty assuring line, and hopefully it's true. But it also sounds like threats are, you have to create scenarios, or you have to create new methods to spend threats. This is actually a pretty interesting tool or resource to keep in mind when it comes to encounter design, in the sense that some encounters or some scenes can be designed to spend threats, and maybe some are not designed to spend threats at all, or maybe of a certain amount, or maybe different kinds of expenditure, and it doesn't give, it sounds like there are more ways to spend threat than there are more ways to spend threats than is given. So this is actually a very interesting idea, but I think I would like to see, before I say much more, I would like to see how this is applied in the adventure, which I won't be included in the RPG study hour, but I will be keeping an eye out of this, of how does it affect scene design in Star Trek Adventures. Alright, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ways to spend threats. Non-player momentum. Non-player may use threat in all ways that player characters use group momentum. So I guess this is pretty much the converse. It's the NPC version of all these: create advantage, opportunity, problem, and obtain information. Although I highly doubt there will be a scenario where the NPCs will be needing to use obtain information, but that means I guess the more interesting application is when NPCs use create problem and paying it with threats instead, rather than using create opportunity, because create problem is actually a bit more offensive in that sense. There may be one or two scenarios where they will want to gain advantage or remove complications. I can see, but I think this is probably a more rare application compared to between problem and opportunity. And I'm more in favor of using problem than opportunity for NPCs than players. Alright, so what else is there? Non-player character threat spends. For any action that would add one or more points to threat, a non-player character performing the same action or choice must spend an equivalent number of points of threat. Come again. For any action that would add one or more points to threat, a non-player performing the same action or choice must spend an equivalent number of points of threat. I think this is something that needs an example. I can't think of a real situation where this can happen. Does this happen when players pay forward with threats, and therefore that's the amount that the NPCs must spend? Because that's going to be actually quite difficult to keep track of, because it has to be on the same action. And I can't imagine a scenario where NPC performing the same action or choice that with the PCs or with another NPCs, or maybe when there are multiple NPCs and they are doing a task, and each of them has to spend the same amount of threats. Which actually kind of sort of makes sense, because naturally the GM will have more threats than they have momentum, and even then there's a cap of the number of momentum the PCs can have. But in the case of the GM, it probably can have a lot more than 6. So I'm guessing this is a way to force GMs to really drain their threat pool. But I'm really needing something more substantial to really explain this, of when are they forced to spend their threats. Alright, let's just move on. Non-player character complications. If a non-player character suffers a complication, the game master may prevent the complication by spending 2 threat. So as I said earlier, if the PCs get a complication, they can spend 2 points they can gain 2 points by removing the complication. And if they suffer complication, which I would think is caused, for example, by maybe create advantage. Is there a situation where the players can cause complication? Well, on the NPC side, the natural way would be if they roll a 20 on their side, and they can spend 2 points to get rid of it, which I don't think is something that the players can do for themselves. Or they can, yes, they can spend 2. So it's pretty much, in other words, it's pretty much the create advantage by NPC version, which is removing complications. Yeah, okay, that makes a bit more sense. All right, reinforcements. The game master may bring additional non-player during a scene. Minor NPCs cost 1 threat apiece, while notable NPCs cost 2. All right, interesting mechanic, especially when deciding how much is too much, especially in the case like D&D, and this is actually a more mechanized way of controlling that number. The only question I have is what constitutes as a minor NPC and what constitutes as a notable NPC. I'm hoping that actually this is a mechanic that is demonstrated in the adventure. I would really like to see that happen, because it's actually sort of interesting to see that sort of dramatic tension play out, and it being controlled by a in-game resource rather than GM arbitrarily deciding that I want to make this a more interesting story. And how do I decide, should a minor NPC appear, or should it be a major NPC to appear, just for the sake of moving the story forward or something like that. All right, environmental effects. The game master may trigger or cause problems within the environment by spending threat. Now this is actually very, very vague, because this, first of all, doesn't mention how many threat points you spend, and secondly is problems. What kind of problems? Like is it a complication? Is it a trait? Is it a is it a threatening circumstance? Yeah. So this is something that it will probably be best explained within the adventure in itself, and I would like to see that happen. But in as far as out of these 6 options is concerned, I'm probably least likely to use environmental effects because there is no real good guideline of what should the problem be and what is an environment. All right, so that actually covers all the rules that I intended to cover for today, for this session. Definitely a lot. There's I wouldn't. It answers a lot of questions, but at the same time also has causes a few more questions of its own. I would definitely appreciate if someone can really provide some interesting feedback or answers to some of these, and where can these answers be found? Can it be found by a better comprehension of the quick start rules here, or is it something that's more detailed and explained in the core rules? And you know, it's in a way it's kind of helpful or useful to have these questions come up right now rather than on the table and then not being able to find the answer there and then, and dragging the pace down for it. So I'm hoping these questions in their own way are helpful to you to find the answers that you need to find. So let's see if we can take a quick look at the pre-gens and see if we can make sense out of some of the things that we've learned today. So let's just come back to our first officer. I'm not sure if you will go through all of the pre-gens again, especially the number of talents that they have. Maybe, but I think I will stop when I think I have learned enough, or my brain is starting to get exhausted from today's learning. It's definitely a very loaded part of the rules, but then again, this is probably one of the core mechanics of the rules in itself. Second only to maybe the combat rules late in the next session that we'll be covering on. So we are going back to Commander Lenaris Loss. He has 4 values. So these values are the ones that will give him reasons to gain determination. The interesting thing here is that previously when we were reading determination, there was no limit into how many determinations can be used within a scene. So it is possible for you to use all the values within a given scene if it's all applicable. And even how values are written, eager and ambitious, the thrill of discovery, the true liberation for all species, a starship is a home, a crew is its family. These are relatively ambiguous values that can sort of be applied to almost any situation, and it's really up to the player to really make a good justification for how these values apply. Although that being said, this option also actually opens up to abuse for players, especially for something like eager and ambitious, because the character can just claim to be eager and ambitious to do everything. He can be eager and ambitious to wash the dishes. He can be eager and ambitious to deal combat damage. He can be eager and ambitious to explore or solve a puzzle. So I think the check and balance here is because it's more of a negotiation process, but this is potentially going to be something that's going to lead to a lot of arguments potentially on the table, because given how values are made, and like I said, because these values values are given in the pre-gen, there is no way of determining these values. Maybe there are rules for creating values in the core rules, but it sounds to or could be just picked up from a list in the core rules. But if it was something that was created like focuses, then it could potentially have some abuses for players to do, and it's something to watch out for as a GM, because determinations, the values can give determination, and determination is actually a really very advantageous thing to have in comparison to momentum. If the effects of a determination is similar to a momentum, then it probably may not be so game breaking, but determination being what they are, it can be a big game changer as well as a game breaker if not handled properly, or with some restraint. All right, so let's look at the talents. So executive officer, when another character in communication with you spends determination, you may spend 3 momentum immediately to let that character regain their point of spent momentum. I don't think determination gives you momentum, do they? I see, right. If they spend determination, you can spend 3 momentum points to let them regain their point of spend momentum. uh it's actually a trade-off. To me, it's a question of a trade-off. Is can you spend 3 momentum to gain back 3 or more spent momentum? And the trigger point being when they spend determination, and determination is chosen or used on step 3, I believe. If we go back to task, is you use your determination at step 3 and momentum, right? So in a way, you are sort of giving them free momentum if they can use their determination, but at the cost of the first officer spending 3 momentum. uh, yeah, I can see there's a potential advantage of doing this, but at the cost of 3 momentum is actually pretty expensive on the side of the officer. And bear in mind that if I'm reading this correctly, characters do not have their own personal pool of momentum. They actually any additional momentum they gain is put into a pool. So 3 momentum is actually half the maximum size of the momentum. So it might not be actually that worth of a trade-off or exchange. You have to spend at least 4 momentums on that task alone to make on that. Yeah, you have to spend at least 4 momentums, but you having to spend 3 momentums to gain back 4 is already 7, so that's actually more than the maximum pool. So I'm not exactly sure how is this supposed to work, or is it sounds like it's just actually narrowing down the situations where this would actually be beneficial. It sounds like it doesn't really sound that all that beneficial at all, unless of course you could use the 3 momentum could come from after making the dice check, and after determining results, after determining success, and you actually somehow manage to get 3 more additional success out of it. Then you could spend that 3 momentum to regain the spent momentum for the spent momentum that was used before the dice was rolled. Again, that's still a very sticky and not so common situation I would foresee happening to make this a worthwhile thing. Alright, that's next talent. So whenever you assist another character using your command discipline, the character being assisted may reroll 1d20. So this is just an expansion of the assist rule. The assist being that you roll 1d20 and add that to the success, and then you actually allow another character to reroll a d20. So that actually makes this officer a very good assister. Like there are additional benefits of him assisting, and you probably want to maximize the amount of time that he assists in most cases. Alright, so tough is when you avoid injury, so let's just skip that because there's nothing to do with what we learned today. Strong Park, okay, you have an unwavering faith in the prophets. Whenever you attempt a task to resist being coerced or threatened, you reduce the difficulty of the task by 1. So okay, that's easy. Reduction of difficulty. Constantly watching. When you attempt a task to detect danger hidden enemies, reduce the difficulty by 1. Again, that's actually easy because that's just a reduction of difficulty. So nothing game changing here, I guess other than the reduction of difficulty. Let's try another character to see if there's something more interesting, like seeing something more interesting. Alright, we are going into the Con Officer, Lieutenant Commander Lian Zhang. Flight Controller. When you analyze or repair any technology related to flight or propulsion, you may use the Con discipline instead of engineering. Okay, fine, there's nothing to do with that. Whenever you attempt a task involving your con skill, you may buy 1 or more bonus d20 by adding to threat. You may reroll a single dice in your dice pool. So this is interesting. I think this is no, I think this needs to be a bit clarified, because our previous understanding is that you can actually give threats to use momentum, and it sounds like you can do this freely, but from reading from this talent, it sounds like you have to have a very specific case to only be able to give threats in exchange for momentum. But this having the additional benefit that you can re-roll a single dice in the dice pool. So I'm not sure if this condition of buying d20s with threats is a prerequisite rather than something that's freely available. It's also something that I probably need to check or clarify with someone else from whoever's watching this or from the core rules. Yeah, definitely some questions being raised here. All right. So jury rig, whenever you attempt an engineering task to perform repairs, you may reduce the difficulty by 2, which is significant, because that means that if a typical task of difficulty 1 can be reduced to a 0, or even a difficulty 2 can be reduced to 0. If you do this, however, then the repairs are only temporary and will last a single scene plus 1 additional scene per momentum spent, repeatable before they fail again. So that is the downside of reducing the difficulty to 0. Jury rigs repairs can only be applied once. So I guess the idea here is you cannot span this talent on the same item. Maybe you can only do this once, but then it only lasts for a short period of time rather than fully repairing it. So this is something that you will probably want to use in the emergency, or you probably want to use in the very short scene. All right. So evasive action tasks, I think we will also leave that behind because this is probably something that we will not see happening within this quick start, and therefore we will not be able to assess its usefulness. All right, let's see computer expertise. When you attempt a task that involves programming or study of a computer, you may add 1 bonus d20 to your pool. So interestingly here is that you will have talents that will give you bonus dice. You will have talents that reduce difficulty. So there are two different sides of the same coin in sense. But also bear in mind that adding 1 bonus dice to your pool, as the talents, as we learned earlier, gaining this additional dice is actually pays into the maximum number of dice they can have. So this doesn't mean that you can gain a 6 bonus dice. This is still within the confines and limitation of the 5 dice pool. Alright, so let's move on. Maybe we can spend a bit more time here. We're going to Chief of Security, Lieutenant Commander Quayla Seraph. Let's look at her talents. Bold Security. When you attempt a task with security and buy 1 or more d20 by adding to threat, you may re-roll a single dice in your pool. Okay, this being very similar to the con officers, and you can only re-roll if you use threat to buy dice. Okay. Alright, once per scene, when you succeed at a task during combat or another perilous situation, you may spend 2 momentum. If you do, choose a single ally. The next task that ally attempts count as having assistance from you using your presence plus command. So presence plus command here is 9 and 4, which is 13. And I'm guessing you still have to roll for assistance, so you still have to roll 13 and less, or you still have to roll 13 and less to give 1 success. The only advantage that this is giving is that you can actually do this in range. You actually choose a single ally. You have to spend 2 momentum to give an assist to a single ally for their next task, and using precision command. Not exactly sure why you would do that unless you're not in a scene, or probably when you're in a scene in combat, and if combat is a scene that you typically cannot give assistance, then this is a way for you to be allowed to use assistance, but at the cost of 2 momentum to do it. Yeah, I can see that way, but I think we need to understand the basics of combat scenes first before we can actually really say if this is actually a pretty good ability or not. Okay, so it looks like there's not much talents that is applicable on a task basis. So let's just move on to the next character. Chief Engineer, Lieutenant Junior Grade Hainor Dale. It's probably the one more interesting. Let's see. Right. Untapped potential. Whenever you succeed a task where you bought 1 or more additional dice with either momentum or threat, you roll 1 challenge dice. If you receive bonus momentum equal to the number of challenge dice You receive bonus momentum equal to the total on the challenge dice, or add 1 to threat if an effect is rolled. Okay, so that's actually pretty interesting. It means that you can potentially regain the momentum that you spend to buy dice, depending on the result of the challenge dice. But at the same time, you could give threats away because you roll an effect, which is, as you remember, is 5 and 6. So a challenge dice has a maximum result of between 1 and 2, so you can actually gain 1 to 2 bonus momentum. It doesn't really say that this momentum has to be immediately spent or lost, or is it basically momentum that you can just carry forward into the pool. I'm inclined to read this as carry forward that can be saved to the pool. It doesn't necessarily have to be immediately spent because it doesn't explicitly say so. So yeah, it sort of technically means that you can actually regain momentums that you lost, momentum that you lost equal to the number of dice pool. But the risk here being that you could potentially have given a threat as well to the GM with the maximum number of 1, because it's one effect. There's only one effect that can be applied. Alright, so testing a theory. When you attempt a task using engineering or science, you may roll 1 additional d20 so long as you have completed a previous task covering the same scientific or technical discipline earlier in the same game session. Alright, so that's actually a pretty interesting thing. Like I said, the part of the talent is that you have to keep track of what you have covered in the session, and you get additional d20 for that, which also counts into your maximum dice pool. So there's a potential of you always having 3 d20s as long as you're covering the same area of scientific or technological discipline. All right, so we have extended tasks mentioned here, but there was no mention of extended task in the task section of the rules. Maybe that's something that will be explored in the adventure in itself, and I certainly hope so, because it'll be interesting to see how it expands on the task rules. But we will have to get there to see if that really happens. All right, so we are going into the next character, our 5th pre-gen, Lieutenant Natala of the Science Officer. Let's look at her talents. Whenever you attempt a task assisted by the ship's computers or sensors, you may reroll a single d20 in your dice pool, which may be the ship's die. Alright, again, ship's die, it means that there's probably some ship-related rules that we are not aware of, so we are not exactly sure how useful is this. Studious. When you spend 1 or more momentum to obtain information, you may ask 1 additional question in total, not per momentum spent. Okay, so remember that we can spend 1 momentum to ask 1 question, and let's say, for example, you spend 3 momentum to ask 3 questions. You get to ask a 4th one because you have the talent of Studious. Alright, and you have a parent figure. When assisting a task and 2 or more characters are involved in the task, the first complication generated on the task may be ignored. This sounds like a pretty big deal, because that means that if there are 3 persons performing a task, then although there's a higher chance of you getting a complication, but the first complication is ignored. So that's actually a pretty big deal, and this actually makes her a very good assistant. And compared with the first officer as well, so there's some synergy between this character and the first officer and the third and whoever's the third character who's performing the task. Maybe say the engineering officer. All right. Whenever you attempt a task to determine the source of a technical problem with your ship, add 1 bonus d20. So this is a bonus d20 counted to the maximum dice pool of 5. So that means any ship related technical problems, you get to roll 3 d20s by default out of 5, and therefore you can still spend momentum for that case. And we are entering into our final character, Medical Officer Lieutenant T. Perel. Let's look at his talents. Okay, first response when you're attempting the first 8 tasks. So I'm going to leave first 8 tasks for now because it's probably a combat encounter. So let's just drop that for now. Colinar, you have undergone the ritual journey to purge emotion. You decrease the difficulty of all tasks to resist coercion, mental intrusion, and other minion attacks by 2. That's actually a pretty big deal because that actually means that you're very tough against, you know, task of resisting these sort of things. Let's see, and then the last quick action is related to combat. Let's skip that. And then doctor's orders. When you attempt a task to coordinate others or coerce someone into taking or refraining from a specific action, you may use your medicine discipline as a command. So okay, nothing that changes the task mechanics. Okay, so okay, yeah, it's definitely much more enlightening after we've understood how task works, what the factors that can affect tasks, and how complications, advantages, and everything else comes into play. It's definitely a rule that has to be played to really understand how it works and what are the sort of scenarios that will typically come up that as a GM you will need to be aware of. So it's something that you can't really understand upon a first read. And like and even as I said, there's even more. There are even more questions that are raised, even with the understanding that we have right now. And it's interesting, but it'll be even more interesting when we see all of this in action. So I guess that will be all for tonight. We've covered the basically the entire basic operations chapter. And on the next session of RPG Study Hour, we will be going into the conflicts chapter, reading all, trying to see if we can cover all the combat rules, or maybe in 1 or 2 videos. So I guess this is the Question GM signing out for now, and I'll see you in the next RPG Study Hour video. So have a good evening.